Believe it or not, we are rapidly approaching the pre-release events for OP13. These are coming right at the end of October, a couple of weeks away now, so welcome to my ultimate guide to the release event for OP13. In this guide, we're going to be covering all the information you need to know about the events themselves, some general tips for you to get a leg up on your competition, and discussing some top techs that I've picked out for OP13. In terms of the event info, this is going to run from October 31st to November 20th at your Bandai official stores and LGSs. And these events can be run as constructed events or sealed events. Constructed is the format we play every week, online on the sim, at regionals, at your locals. So I do much prefer these events being run as sealed, and the vast majority of this video will be focusing on going over the sealed format. For participating, you're going to get a pack of 2 cards, which will include one of the 3rd anniversary stamped Rainbow Luffy, and one of these 3 promos. We have the Starlight 1 Luffy, with the Rush and Unblockable. You've got this really bad ace that nobody really plays, and the Odyssey Sabo, which is pretty popular in Lim. In addition to this, you're going to get another pack of 2 cards, which are commons or uncommons from the OP13 set, with a little stamp here, like you can see up on this Stronger in the top right. It says 2nd anniversary for this one. Well, for the new event, it'll say 3rd anniversary. I'm very much expecting something very similar to this. And if you're lucky enough to win, you'll get a pack with all 3 of the Brothers promos with foiling. As far as I can tell, the participation ones are just non-holos, but they still have some pretty nice artwork, you know? And these ones, again, as far as we can tell at this point, are going to be non-textured, but will be foiled. And they have a slightly different stamp with winner on it, instead of just the 3rd anniversary stamp that you can see down here. I actually kind of prefer this stamp, although these ones will obviously go for more money. Next up, what do you need to bring? If this is your first time at a pre-release event, welcome. These are great events for new players to jump into One Piece, and you don't really need to bring much. Some sleeves will be handy because you don't want to damage your cards. Playmat, of course, if you'd like. Dice to help you determine who goes first and keep track of power down and things like that. Leaders, if needed, and we'll be discussing that in a moment. Some stores will make you bring your own leader, whereas others will force you to use the Rainbow Luffy leader that we showed off a couple slides back. And finally, you will need 10 Don. If you can't get your hands on 10 Don, don't worry. People at your locals will have spare Don they can lend you, or you could even use empty sleeves with backwards cards in them. Next up, in terms of the core rules of the sealed format. So you're going to open your 6 packs of cards, and then from what you open, you need to construct a 40 card deck. That's 40, not 50, like standard. And in addition, to make this format possible, there are no color restrictions and also no card count restrictions. So if you pull 10 of the same vanilla, you can include all of them. What a time to be alive. And in addition to that, the rest of your pulls are going to be a sideboard. Say after round 1, you find a card in your deck that you didn't read properly, you didn't understand properly, and you find out that it doesn't work with your deck. Well, you can swap it out for something from your sideboard. It's very much understood that these events will attract more new players than normal, so there's sort of a fail-safe that if you didn't understand how the cards worked, or you just made mistakes, these cards are new to everyone, you can not have a dead card in your deck for the rest of the day, which is great. Some general tips for the sealed format. Board control is very important. There are a lot of big characters in sealed, even just things like vanillas, like a 6/8 vanilla. That's a pretty big guy, that demands a lot of counter later on. So it is important to make sure you're controlling your opponent's board as best as you can. Blockers are invaluable. There are far fewer ways to deal with blockers in sealed than there are in, for example, constructed, but it is worth being aware of what cards your opponent might have to get around them, especially if you were playing a best of 3 for some reason. And also, know when you've lost the board. There may well come a point where your opponent's just drawing better cards than you, or they've just had maybe a lucky trigger or something. Setting up to win the game in 2 or 3, however many turns it may be, is still important in sealed as it is in constructed. You're not always going to be able to control the board, so if you can't, make sure you at least put yourself in a position to potentially win. Now, a small note on leaders. So before we talk about Rainbow Luffy, there are 2 ways that stores will choose to do these. Some stores will make everyone use the Rainbow Luffy leader, and this is generally the format that I prefer, but other stores will say you can choose and play whatever leader you like, either from your packs or that you have in your binder. I generally like Rainbow Luffy, because there's a lot of cards in every set, that are leader locked to certain types, so it makes more of your card pool viable, and it puts everyone on the level playing field if there's newer players who might not have some of the older leaders. So how does Rainbow Luffy work? So Luffy is considered a leader with all colors, names, attributes, and types. So that means anything that is leader locked or type locked will work with Luffy. As a result, this Jaguar D Soul up in the top right says, trigger if your leader is Nico Robin, you can play this card. Well, Luffy is considered Nico Robin, so you can play this card. Perona says if your leader has the slash attribute. So, well, while Luffy has the strike attribute in the top right, he is considered to have the slash attribute, according to the rules, so you can then use the main effect of Perona. And my favourite one, the Kung Fu Dugong. Kung Fu Dugong says if you have another Kung Fu Dugong in play, this character will get blocker. Well, Luffy has every name, and that includes Kung Fu Dugong, so your Kung Fu Dugong would become a blocker. There aren't as many cards in this set that are locked as other sets have been in the past, but there's still a good amount, and it just makes the gameplay a little bit more interesting, I find. So what if your store's not doing Rainbow Luffy? Well, they will make you choose your own leader. And these are some of the leaders that have done the best in the past. Broadly, I think Sanji, Red Sanji, is just the best leader for this format at the minute. Giving all your vanillas and vanilla statline cards just rush, it's very, very powerful. These games in Sealed don't tend to go on for as many turns as in Constructed a lot of the time, so just having everything have rush is incredibly strong. If you don't want to play Red Sanji though, Bonnie is a nice defensive option. You can get a lot of value out of her effect, and it is worth noting that in this set, there are quite a number of cards that restand Dons at the end of your turn. So that could be a reason to maybe try Bonnie in this set. If you draw a lot of those cards that say, well, you can restand a Don, well, you get extra value because of Bonnie's on opponent's turn effect. Zoro did pretty well last set. I still do think Sanji is slightly better, but if you're after a more aggressive leader that doesn't rely on your card pool, maybe you pull some really bad cards, you could go with Zoro. I think he is missing a lot of rest in this set, unfortunately. There's not that many ways to rest your opponent's characters easily, but Zoro is a good choice. And if you really want to turn your brain off, you could go with Yamato. Double attack isn't too crazy, where a lot of the more popular leaders now are 5 life, but if you really want to go balls to the wall, you could very well try out Yamato. It's not too bad. In terms of the new leaders, I think both Bonnie and Emu are just a complete write-off. Emu having only 4 life and being a 5k leader, and having an extra rule about including big events, no, I don't think this is going to be very good. Even though the activate main to trash 1, draw 1 is reasonable. Bonnie relies on you drawing a lot of trigger characters in your packs. If you don't get trigger characters, you don't have a leader effect, which is obviously quite the detriment. In addition, I think Sabo, whilst he has a strong effect, there simply aren't enough good characters with a cost of 8 or more for this guy to be very reliable. Whilst he's pretty strong in standard, a lot of his sort of pseudo 8 costs come from the previous set, and in this set is really just like the 5 cost Koala is the only one that you can cheat this effect online early, so I don't really have a lot of hope for him. Luffy is a very cool effect, and it's great to defend your leader, but if your characters don't end up being Straw Hat Crew, you can't defend your characters with your leader effect, so I feel like you will end up losing the board a lot with this leader, and also he only has 4 life, which is, again, quite the detriment. Roger, I'm very torn on. Being a 7k leader seems like it would be inherently incredibly strong in pre-release, but the fact that you are playing 1 Don behind, and you won't have as much ramp as you would in a constructed Roger deck, does give me a little bit of fear that this leader just won't do very much, especially into more aggressive decks like Red Sanji. However, if you do pull enough Roger Pirates ramp cards, you could consider trying him, I suppose. And that sort of leaves us with Ace. I think Ace is the most promising of the new leaders. Obviously, 3 life is a massive downside, but having 6,000 power means either your opponent's going to be playing off curve by having to put a Don on their leader to attack with it every time, or they're just not attacking with their leader, which is great. In addition to that, you're going to get a lot of extra draws with this guy, and having the effect turn your bricks into 2Ks is going to give you a lot more defense than other leaders, even though you only have 3 lives. Without testing this myself in Sealed, I'm not sure, but I could see Ace actually being pretty reasonable in the Sealed format. It's the first 6,000 power leader that I think I've actually had a lot of hope for in this format, because UP Luffy was just way too type locked. Newgate kills himself, And RP Luffy just doesn't have a good enough effect, really. Ramping 1 Don sometimes, it's not all that. This ace, I think, does have some potential. So, what to include in your deck? This is a very brief overview. This is obviously not going to be exact. But broadly speaking, I would be including all the 2Ks you pull. And I have put some asterisks here because there are some pretty bad ones in this set. If you pull enough, you may well not include them all. All vanillas, again, we'll get to it, but there is one vanilla in this set who I would strongly avoid. All blockers, there aren't actually that many blockers in this set in comparison to older sets. So I would stick by this. Pretty much all the blockers in this set are worth including. And then we come to cards with vanilla stat lines. I like to call them Vanill-ish cards. This is, for example, a card like the Rush Sorrow from set 1. He's got a vanilla stat line 3-5, but he is not a vanilla because he has an effect. Powerful plays, and I've got a couple slides at the end of this video that will be going over what I think are some of the most powerful cards in this set in particular, for sealed. And after that, you're going to have to use your intuition. Give it a go, and again, if things don't work out, remember, you can change some of the cards in your deck with your sideboard after the round. So first up, in terms of 2Ks, we have 3 common 2Ks, 4 uncommon 2Ks, 3 rare 2Ks, and 1 SR. Starting with the common 2Ks, Mioscard basically doesn't have an effect. Same with Gordon. Rouge doesn't have an effect, but does have a pretty handy trigger. So I would certainly include this Rouge before Gordon or Mioscard. But again, you're probably going to end up including most of these. This trigger is actually pretty funny in Rainbow Luffy. If you get this, your leader just becomes 8k. What a time to be alive. In terms of the uncommon ones, Inazuma's just a really good on-rate play. A 4-5 that gives it Don to your leader is not to be scoffed at. Makino can buff up your Monkey D. Luffy by effectively 1000 power. Only really useful in Rainbow Luffy. But will then act as a pseudo blocker or can just be an extra 1k at the end of the game. Nekomamushi is like really poor man's Usahachi. Not going to be anywhere as good as Usahachi at closing out the game. But can pop some low power characters to maybe bonk some chump blockers to let you go for lethal. Edison's effect seems pretty bad, honestly. I don't really like this one. Buggy can ramp in Rainbow Luffy, but I'm not sure how important ramp is going to be in that sort of deck, as opposed to just keeping this in hand for a 2k. Shepherd Jupiter is probably never going to get played for 7 Don. That's incredibly expensive, but again, is a 2k. Otama's great. After you've taken a couple of lives, draw 2 trash 1 on a 2k is brilliant. I would say this is one of the best 2Ks in the set. And the Ace Sabo and Luffy is also a pretty good one. You can play this early because there's not too much removal in this set. And then you can get some pretty useful value out of them later. Being able to reduce one of your opponent's characters by 3k is pretty good. Moving on to the vanilla 2Ks. We have one of each colour in the 5-6 and one of each colour in the 6-7. Oddly, there is no purple 6-7 in this set. I don't know what happened to that one, but here we are. Vanilla 2Ks are brilliant. They're just good, reliable on-curve plays. If you get to 5 Don, you don't have anything better, you would be very happy to play one of these 5-6s. If you get to 6 Don, and you don't have anything better, you would be happy to play one of these 6-7s. The vanilla 2Ks are a big upgrade for the sealed format in general, just because they increase the consistency of all the decks being able to do something. Too many times in the past, you'd get to like 5 Don and just not have a play. So these vanilla 2Ks, really, really good. In terms of the raw numbers, the amount of 2Ks in this set compared to OP12, it's about the same. There's one less common 2K, but there are one more rare, and there is an SR 2K this time. I think on average, you'll probably get one less maybe than you did in OP12, just as a point of reference. The way that the ratios work is common 2Ks. In 6 packs, you will probably get one of each. Uncommon 2Ks, you'll probably get 0.5 of each. Rares, you might get a rare. And SRs, you're unlikely to hit the 1 2K SR, but you never know. And that sort of does average out to around 10 to 11 2Ks in your 6 packs that you're going to open. Now, in terms of actual vanillas, there really aren't many this time. They've been slowly doing away with the vanillas in favor of vanilla 2Ks, which I'm not complaining about. You've got 2 5-7s, a 4-6, and 6-8. All of these I'd probably include in my deck. They're just good statted cards, especially these 5-7s and the 6-8. Very nice big stat lines there. St. Jalmac 2-4, avoid this. Do not include this card. This is one of the worst cards in the set. You don't want to include attacking characters that certainly have a lower power than you. Even like 3-5s are a little iffy, but a 2-4, that's horrific. Now moving on to Vanill-ish cards. Again, these are cards with vanilla stat lines, but they have effects. And we see the Pokemon Vanill-ish up here. He's pretty cool. Anyway, we have 2 3/5s. We have the Frankie and the Boa. Frankie has a pretty cool on-KO that will make it a little bit difficult for your opponent to take him out. Boa also has a useful on-KO. It won't make it difficult for your opponent to take her out, but it is nice that you get a couple cards back when she does go down in Rainbow Luffy or a multicolored leader. Be aware you can't use this on-KO if you're playing Red Sanji. In terms of 5/7s, we have a couple. This Beppo. I'm going to talk more about this Beppo later, but I think this Beppo is one of the best cards in the set for sealed. And this Sanji is pretty damn good too. On play, getting 2 Dons back is just going to increase your consistency. Although do note that it means you cannot give this rush with Red Sanji. And then at the end of your turn, if you're playing Fillmore Straw Hat Crew Leader, which includes both Red Sanji and Rainbow Luffy, you get a set of Dons active. And there are quite a lot of 1-Don counter events in this set that you might want to use. We'll cover those later. So I do think this is an incredible play in both Red Sanji and Rainbow Luffy. Vista, I think, is another one of the best cards in the set. Having double attack just built in and this incredible effect where any kind of removal or being KO'd in battle, you can just trash 1 Whitebeard Pirates type card instead. Do note, there will only be a limited amount of Whitebeard Pirates type cards in your deck. However, I think there are enough decent ones that this effect will come up fairly often. And I mean, at an 8k stat line, he's not going to be that hard to defend in battle anyway, and there's not that many effects that can remove him by an effect. So this shouldn't be too hard to keep hanging around. And then finally, we've got 4 10/12s. In Rainbow Luffy, you could use the 5 Elders, but you're probably not going to. This Shanks, I think, is okay, but it could potentially set you up to lose if you don't already have a board. If you have a board, playing this Shanks is incredible, because you get a 10/12, and then you can use all of your Dons again for swinging with your characters. But if you are behind, I don't think this is going to particularly help you come back, if you understand what I mean. The Whitebeard blocker, it's great. It's a 10/12 blocker, gives you a bunch of Dons, gives you some cycle. This is one of the best cards in the set. And the Roger is a bit weird. Obviously, in Red Sanji, I probably wouldn't want to play this, because then you can't give anything rush, because it will be negated. And it interacts weirdly with Rainbow Luffy, because his effect won't be negated, because he has Roger Pirates. But it will still negate your other characters. So if you've got characters with useful effects, like, for example, that Vista, or the Beppo, the Roger's a bit weird, but his effect on its own is very, very good. So I'm a bit mixed on the Roger. I think he probably is worth playing, but it's one to sort of carefully consider before you just throw him in. Next, blockers. Here are the blockers. This is all the blockers in the set, minus one that was way too conditional. In terms of chump blockers, you've got Morgans. He can give you a bit of a cycle, and then there's a 3/4 chump blocker. Not too bad. Charlos doesn't give you a cycle, but it only costs 2. And Vegapunk is a conditional chump blocker, but his condition is fairly easy to meet. You just need to have 2 or more given Don. That shouldn't be too difficult. Finally, we have Boa Marigold, who is a 5/4 blocker. Horrible stat line. I think this is the blocker I would probably not include. Even if you're playing Rainbow Luffy, the only Boa Hancock in the set is this 3/5 Boa from the previous slide. And, like, that's just not good enough, cheating that out once on a blocker. Specifically that one card. It's not good enough. I don't think this Boa Marigold is worth playing. In terms of 6k blockers are always great because they're bigger than your leader. So you will get to block 3 5ks with them, which is lovely. Odin can ramp you a Don conditionally. It's not too bad. Law's a weird one because sometimes you will get insane value out of this Law. If you're able to pick up something very small and then cheat out a 5 cost, even if it's just like a 5 cost vanilla, I mean, that's great value. You get a 6/6 that is a blocker later on, and you get to play a 5 cost. However, if you don't have a small character, this is a bit weird. You could maybe swap like a 4 cost for a 5 cost on curve, sort of, but again, it's not incredible. The power level of this card is going to be very varied. You'll get some insane plays with this in sealed, and you'll also get some turns where it's just like not that good. Kobe is pretty cool. You can restand a Don in both Sanji and Rainbow Luffy, because Sanji has the strike attribute, and Rainbow Luffy is obviously has the film type and the strike attribute. So you will get a Don back, and he's a nice little blocker. Going up here to the top right, both Walkyrie and Hiyori are some of the best blockers in the set. Walkyrie, you do have to be careful, and this goes for Mars as well. Early on in the game, you will not have 7 cards in the trash. So this will not be a blocker, for example, on curve. But later on, this effect should be live. And then getting to draw a card when he goes down, it's pretty good. I'd play him if he was just a 4/5 that drew a card when it went down. But the fact that in addition to that, sometimes this is a blocker and also unremovable, great. Hiyori is another great blocker. If your leader is multicolored, you get a heal when you block with her, which is brilliant. Obviously, only going to work in Rainbow Luffy, won't work in Red Sanji because he's not multicolored. But this being a blocker that blocks a hit and heals, that effectively blocks 2 hits. What a time to be alive. Moving back to the middle, we have Mars and Stussy. Mars is sort of okay. 6-5 is a very expensive stat line. But don't forget he does blow up a 5 when you play him if you trash one card. So probably worth including. Stussy is only really worth including in Rainbow Luffy because her effect is leader locked. And then even on top of that, you've got to have a 5 cost with a trigger. So this one, I'd say, is a little bit more conditional. If you pull a lot of trigger characters, definitely worth including. If you don't get so many, maybe consider her, because 7k blocker is a good stat line, but it's not too crazy, and if you're not going to be able to play out a character reliably, this is a little weak. Finally, on the bottom right, we've got the Nugate, who we spoke about before, and also the Secret Sabo. He's an incredible he's an incredible blocker. 6-7 blocker that gives one rested Don every single turn. Brilliant. Are you going to pull this though? Probably not. But if you do, snap it include on the Sabo and the Nugate. Now, I've split events into 3 categories this time. We've got main events, counter events, and hybrid events. In terms of the main events, these are the ones that I think are worth considering. Gum Gum Gatling Gun in Rainbow Luffy is basically just an instant include. It gives you arrested Don and minus that 2000 power. This is almost certainly always going to be a good effect. And the trigger's pretty nice as well. Meteor Fist is similar, but a little bit more expensive, obviously, because this is 3 Don for minus 5, whereas Gatling Gun is effectively 0 Don for minus 2. So this is a very strong effect and will help you battle for board. Probably worth including, but if you get a good card pull, you might end up culling this Meteor Fist. And the same with Dawn Stamp. This is one of the only actual removal events in the set for characters that aren't chump blockers. So this is really quite a good card. So this sort of occupies its own niche, really. Popping a 6 for 5 Don, it's not too bad. The flipping your life face up is almost always going to be live in a sealed format. And the fact that it has a trigger so that you don't just brick on it is actually quite nice too. I'd probably include this on average. It will help you hit the vast majority of these blockers. So that'll be pretty nice when you're going for game. And then finally, Gum Gum Elephant Gun, again, 2 Don, rest of 5. Even if you don't use this 2 Don that you get back at the end of your turn to use any counter events, for example, just resting a 5 is pretty good, either to attack into it or just to rest a blocker for going for game. Imagine if your opponent plays out this Hiyori blocker, and they're like, yo, I can block 1 hit and get a heal. And then you go with the Gum Gum Elephant Gun, rest the Hiyori, they don't get to block, they don't get to heal, they don't get nothing. You're cooking them, you're cooking them. I do think Gum Gum Elephant Gun is like a very poor man's dead man's game, but probably worth including nonetheless. Next up, in terms of counter events, there really aren't that many. Let's start off with Never Existed. Yes, this is technically a hybrid event. No, nobody's ever going to blow up an empty throne in pre-release. The empty throne's way too slow, in my opinion, for pre-release. So, but this is still just a 4k counter event in Rainbow Luffy. What's not to love? Gum Gum Snake Shot, I think, is it's a bit of a cope pick, but I actually think it's not too bad. If your opponent has a 3 or 4 cost, and you use this when that 3 or 4 cost attacks, you just blow it up, and that negates the attack as well, which is really quite strong. It's like an infinite 2k counter and destroy a character in very specific scenarios. Will those scenarios come up all that much? I'm not so sure, but I think this could be a really cool one to catch your opponent off guard with, because people may well overlook this card. Finally, Paper After Image is pretty efficient. You get 2 Don for 3k always, which is fine, and then if your opponent is low on life, so towards the end of the game, which is probably when you're using these counter events anyway, you can buff something by 1000 for the turn. Usually that's going to go on your leader, but if your opponent has sort of 3-4 swings, this can easily be like a 2-6, 2-7, in theory. So I think this is a good card, nonetheless. In terms of hybrid events, I think this one at the top, I know you're strong, I'll go all out from the start, is one of the potentially most impactful cards in the set. For sealed, let me, I'll add for sealed. 3 Don to freeze 2 of your opponent's guys, obviously it's no electrical Luna, but it's very, very good. Especially in Red Sanji mirrors, everything's going to be tapped. Your opponent's playing a guy, giving it rush and attacking. Being able to freeze 2 things for just 3, that's incredible, and it comes with a 3k power buff to your leader. What a time to be alive. If I give into the Force, there'll be no point to my life down here in the bottom. It's unblockable. You're going to play this. If you pull this, you're going to play it. Then if you pull this and then it's in your hand, it just changes how you're going to play the game. You're going to be much more focused on getting your opponent to 0 so that you can use this as an option. And the fact that it's a 3k counter as well is just brilliant. Phoenix, Pineapple, and Head Straight for the Top sort of fit into the same boat for me. They're both sort of dealing with chump blockers. Pineapple deals with just one 3k. Head Straight for the Top deals with a 4k base and a 3k base, but does cost twice as much. And you need to have a given Don card. So you've got to jump through a few more hoops for this, and your opponent really has to have 2 chump blockers for you to get value out of this one, compared to the Phoenix Pineapple. So I think I'd say the Phoenix is a little bit better, but they're both pretty reasonable, and again, both 3000 power buffs. Finally, you've got this one in the top right. I'm a bit mixed on this one. It can be ramping Rainbow Luffy. I'm not sure how much you'd want to, because it still doesn't let you ramp on 2, because you have to have that given Don. So you would still have to be on 3, ramping from sort of 3 to 4, and then drawing to 6. I mean, it's okay if you're playing a lot of 6 costs. This could come up, and at the end of the day, it could be worse. Is 3k buff to your leader. Finally, we've got a new 0 cost. Exciting times. This one forgoes the trigger for a second effect, which I think just makes it better than the old 0 costs, broadly speaking. If you pull this, definitely include this one. Divine Departure is a banger. And this main effect will actually be quite useful in Sealed to deal with your opponent's bigger characters. Next up, these are what I would consider some of the top cards to look out for. Starting off in the top left, we've got 2 cards that are only really useful for Rainbow Luffy. Normally, I heavily recommend against searches, but this Garp, if you're playing Luffy, Saba, or Ace, searches for pretty much anything. That's great. Obviously a rare, so you're probably not going to get too many of these, but if you do, and you're playing Rainbow Luffy format, this is brilliant. Bullet is basically a 3-6 that ramps. You might have to wait a turn to attack with him before he becomes that 6k power. But if you're playing Rainbow Luffy, I think this is an absolute banger. And now I want to talk about what I think are possibly the best 2 cards in the set, or at least the most sleeper 2 cards in the set. Beppo and Zoro. Both of these guys let you set them as active at the end of your turn. That means if your opponent doesn't have hard removal, which we already went over, there really isn't much of in this set, they cannot deal with these characters. They get to sit there, swing in, and then pop back up active. What a treat. Beppo especially, being a 7k swinger that restands, I think is brilliant. And he also has the option to restand a Don. So if you don't need him to be restood this turn, say it's on the turn that you played him in your Rainbow Luffy deck, well, you can just restand a Don, and then you've got a Don for some kind of counter event. Zoro has a brilliant on-play in both Red Sanji and in Rainbow Luffy. You get 2 Dons back, although do note that the fact that he has an on-play means that you cannot give him Rush in Red Sanji. Having guys on the board that your opponent either doesn't want to deal with or straight up can't deal with is an incredible boon for pre-release. So that's why I'm really, really high on these 2. And we'll discuss Vista because basically the same thing applies to him. Although I will say this is also incredible in Red Sanji. Rush and double attack is just kind of gross. And the fact that you can use your spare Whitebeard card to just defend him from no matter how big your opponent's swing is, it's just incredible, man. These 3 cards, I think, are some of the 3 that I'm looking out for, especially at lower rarities. I mean, the Beppos are common. This Beppo is a common. You're gonna pull him. Make sure you play him. Going down on the left here, again, more bodies that your opponent doesn't want to deal with. Hiyori, it's a blocker that gives you a life. We talked about her before, and the same with the Walkyrie. Both of these being blockers with upside is brilliant. And finally, the Uta, again, giving you Dons back, like all these green cards are doing, just gives you more and more aggression. And the fact that when this goes down, you get to play a 5, I mean, it just keeps up board tempo again. And then over here on the right, you're probably not going to get as many of these cards, but these are all really, really good. There's not much rush in this set, I will say. Some of the best rushers really are here, the Rayleigh, the Bonnie, and the Ace. All 3 of these cards are incredible. Rayleigh can rest down so many of the best blockers in the set, like that Hiyori and the Walkyrie. Bonnie and Rainbow Luffy's going to be brilliant, having rush and having a burn effect. I mean, that's just so powerful in Rainbow Luffy format especially. And Ace is a bit more mixed, but I think he's still worth it on average. You don't have to bounce the 5 if you don't want to, but having the option to force the 5 back to their hand, maybe this Beppo, is one of the few ways you can actually deal with this. Finally, Nugate, obviously we talked about him plenty. This is incredible. 10-12 blocker, just blocks everything. It's brilliant. Monkey D. Luffy again, giving you 4 Don back and having double attack. Worth noting, you cannot give this rush with Red Sanji because he has an on-play, but it's still a very good card. It's still very, very powerful. And finally, the Sabo. We spoke about him before again, but it can't be understated. Good blocker stat line with a positive effect, activate main, is brilliant. In terms of a few sleepers, here's a couple that I think are not as powerful as the previous slides cards, but are still ones to keep your eyes on, and a lot of these are lower rarity as well. The Chopper is just a very efficient guy. He gives you a couple Dons back, pretty good. Robin freezing something is a very nice on-curve play. You can freeze whatever your opponent did last turn, and as a plus, this can also turn off blockers, other than that Whitebeard blocker. If your opponent's very low on cards, but has like too many blockers for you to deal with, the Robin can come in clutch there. In terms of these Whitebeard cards, these are all draw effects. Izzo has a very bad stat line, 6/6 sucks. But on play you get to draw 2, so it's probably worth it on balance, I think. Little Lords Jr. only really worth playing in Rainbow Luffy. But the fact that Little Lords Jr. has, when attacking, draw a card, I mean, that's pretty damn good. And again, he's hard to deal with. 7k stat line is no joke. And Curial is basically a 3/5 every turn, because he can give 1 rested Don to himself to just attack for 5. And then when your opponent deals with him, you get to draw a card. It's nothing game-changing, but it is just a nice little play. A 3/5 that your opponent is going to want to deal with because they don't want to be taking 5k swing every turn for no reason. But then it draws you a card and it goes down, and it's effectively blocked a hit. I think Curial is worth playing. Down in the bottom left, we've got a bit of power down, both Ethan Baron, V Nostro, and S-Snake. Nostro is possibly the best, like, non-SR rush. It's kind of bleak. He's kind of expensive. The stat line's pretty bad, but he can at least battle for board a little bit if you do have 10 in the trash. S-Snake is a bit better for that. You do have to meet her condition, but it's a fairly easy condition to meet. And then you get some power down every turn. It's pretty good, although do note that her stat line's a bit weak. So after this attacks once, it will probably end up hitting the graveyard. Scopogaban in Rainbow Luffy is just very efficient. You don't need to have a given Don for this one. They're all different. All these Roger Pirates, some of them are given Dons, some of them are type locked, some of them are both. Scopper is just type locked to Roger, which obviously Rainbow Luffy counts as. So you just get a 6/7 with a draw 2 trash 1, and you get a Rampant Don. It's pretty damn good. I am a big fan of this Scopogaban, actually. And also the Koala. This is like a budget version of the Blocker Sabo. However, this one's a common, so you'll probably end up pulling this. And it can just give something arrested on every turn. Pretty damn good. Now, in terms of some quick OP13 specific tips, there is quite a high 2k count, as there has been for the previous sets. So I think swinging 5 or 7 is probably more useful than 6 when you're going for lethal. In the past, when we've had very low 2k counts in sets, I've advised swinging 6 when going for lethal, which is obviously not what you would do in Constructed. But in this sealed format, there's a lot of 2Ks, so I'd probably stick with odd numbers. There's a low blocker count, so pushing your opponent to 0 will be more useful than in previous sets. There's a good chance that they just don't have any blockers in their hand. As we went over a few slides ago, there's a very limited number of blockers, and most of the good ones are higher rarities, rare or above, so your opponent may well just not be able to deal with that. Also, the Ace event being unblockable means that even if your opponent does then shit out 3 blockers, well, if you've got that unblockable event, you don't care. Vanilla 2Ks, they've been doing these in quite a few sets now. I think it's great. Pre-release sort of used to suffer in the past, where a lot of the 2Ks were really bad, and you also didn't get many in the set. And you got a bunch of vanillas, which were pretty good in pre-release, but they're not exciting cards, right? Condensing the vanillas and the 2Ks into the same slot is really nice for sort of min-maxing the efficiency of your deck. Your consistency pieces in your like decent 5/6 Don plays are also your 2Ks. It's pretty good. Going first versus second on this set is going to depend on your card pool, as ever. However, I think broadly, I quite like second. There are quite a number of like good 4 and 6 Don plays, things like the S-Snake, the Izo, the Scopogaban. Like War Curie is a great 4 Don play, Zoro, the Vista's a good 6 Don play. And when you go back to the vanillas, there's like a couple 4 and 6s. Although I will say it really is going to depend on what you pull. If you pull a bunch of 5s, if you pull like Beppos, maybe some Kobe's, and then maybe 3s like this Frankie, you could very easily go first. It's certainly not bad this set. Look at your card pool and see what's going to work out best for you. Also, there are a lot of quite poor cards in this set, especially if you're playing Red Sanji as opposed to Rainbow Luffy. because that increases the amount of cards that don't work with your leader. So I think deck building should actually be quite easy this format. Because like last set, there wasn't that many really bad cards, but in this set, a lot of the red cards are really bad. A lot of the emu cards are just not terribly useful in like sealed. So I think the deck building will be a little easier, which is cool for new players, I guess. So that's it. That was my guide to the OP13 release event. If you have any more questions, please leave them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer them. If you have any further tips for people, again, drop us a comment. I want as many of the viewers to win these as possible. That's why I'm sharing my advice, so if you've got more advice, that would be great. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.